But thank you so much for coming to the second lecture in our spring lecture series. And I am so excited to introduce Kaluani Murphy. She was born and raised in Waimea and Waipio on the island of Hawaii. A Hōkūleʻa course at the University of Hawaii at Manoa led her to Hōkūleʻa in 1997. She is grateful for her extraordinary mentors, the opportunities to voyage throughout the islands and Hawaii and Oceania, and to be pursuing the art of wayfinding through her courses in Hawaiian Astronomy and Navigation at the University of Hawaii. I deeply apologize if I mispronounced any of the Hawaiian, but without further ado, please take it away. You are muted.
It's not one thing, it's another. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for having me and joining and letting me join you guys really tonight to share a little bit about kind of some astronomy in our part of the world. I thought it'd be hard to talk about our navigation and non-instrument navigation without really introducing the story of Hōkūleʻa. So I wanted to kind of introduce that first. I'll share a little bit about the background and the context to the kind of navigation that we do, and yeah, I'm definitely gonna leave time for you folks to ask questions, and I'll just try to get through some of these quickly. And hopefully you guys will have questions for me and we can spend more time talking about things that you guys are curious about or would like to know more about. So yes, as Julian said, I come from Hawaii Island, and Hawaii, there are at least 8 of these bigger islands that we live on. I'm on Oahu now, which is where Hōkūleʻa lives and was born. This year she actually makes 50 years, so we're celebrating 5 decades of voyaging with Hōkūleʻa. This was 50 years ago. This is Hōkūleʻa being launched at a place we call Hakipu'u or Pualoa on the north end of Kaneohe Bay on Oahu. And yeah, she was first launched March 8th of 1975. It's a kind of big deal for us because this is the first modern day voyaging canoe that we've had. We didn't have a voyaging canoe in centuries, and we knew our mo'olelo, our stories told us that we had our ancestors, came to our islands on a canoe much like this one, but we didn't have those around in the 70s. We didn't have them around, as I said, for several centuries, and so this was meant to be like a performance accurate replica using modern materials, so fiberglass and plywood, to recreate these canoes. Basically it's your old school catamaran. Is what our catamaran designs now are based off, this double hulled sailing vessel. And yeah, so as much as possible they try to build it and much the same design that our ancestors' canoes would have been. And when they did build Hōkūleʻa, there weren't any people in Hawaii that knew how to navigate the way that our ancestors did. So not having this knowledge of traveling thousands of miles open ocean without any instruments, we didn't have the canoes for all the time, and so we also didn't have that knowledge, or at least there wasn't anyone in Hawaii willing to step forward to say like, oh, this was passed on to me and I know how to do this. So they actually found a navigator in the tiny island called Satawal in Micronesia, and his name is Maupiailuk, or Pius Maupiailuk. He was actually introduced to the Polynesian Voyaging Society, who was an organization that had organized to build Hōkūleʻa. And we've affectionately called him Papa Mau because he's much like a living ancestor, but really like a papa, like a father, really a father of navigation to us. But where he lives in Satawal, it's just north of the equator, about 7 to 9 degrees north of the equator. And the islands of Micronesia are small islands, a lot of low atolls. And because they're small, they also can't, there's not enough food on each island to sustain the population that lives there. So the knowledge of being able to sail island to island that you can't see over the horizon, it was still very much alive in Satsual. And we were really lucky that someone from the Peace Corps actually introduced Mau to the Polynesian Voyaging Society folks when looking for someone to navigate Hōkūleʻa. And the idea was build this canoe, sail it to Tahiti in the traditional way without instruments, and then sail back home to Hawaii. And that was kind of like, she was built for this one voyage. And different people had kind of their reasons why this was important. You know, one was kind of like a scientific experiment, like to prove that this could be done without using, you know, a compass, a GPS, a sextant. And another really especially for the people of Hawaii, is kind of like breathing life into our stories that told us that this is how our ancestors traveled. And so Mau came, he was willing to make this voyage, about 2,500 miles to Tahiti. There was a handful of men from Hawaii that were on board. And there was someone from Tahiti. There were some scientists on board, other leadership that had a role in the creation of Hōkūleʻa. When they got to Tahiti, there were estimates of about 17,000 people that welcomed her when they got to shore. And just kind of gives you an idea that this was a significant time. This was first canoe in, you know, these people's lifetime that they've seen. We have our stories that tell us about it, but to actually see a canoe like this. And so this is really a big part of that really sparked this kind of a cultural renaissance or reawakening. It brought a whole lot of pride back to, you know, native peoples of Oceania, of Polynesia especially, who really in Hawaii and Tahiti, because of colonization, were, you know, not really proud to be Hawaiian or Tahitian or whichever island because of that colonial the all of the things that come with that. And you know, the loss of you know, a lot of people from diseases, the loss of our, you know, losing our language. Anyway, so this was just a really important time to start to kind of reawaken that sense of pride and who we are and who we come from. But along with that success of that voyage of getting to Tahiti, Mau navigated without using instruments, just the clues and nature around him. It was also, there's this challenges of kind of some of the personalities on board, challenges that weren't really addressed before they left Hawaii. And so when they got to Tahiti, actually Mau left and he went home back to Sadawal, and he kind of told the crew, he said not to try to find him. Basically, he's a very disciplined man, and you know, he told them to leave all your problems at home, leave everything on land, because when we go to sea, life is different. We eat differently, we live differently, we need to act differently, and we need to be very disciplined. So because he wasn't thrilled with the problems that arose during the trip, he decided to leave. So the success of that was kind of shadowed by the departure of this amazing navigator. This is just another shot of the canoe, kind of bird's eye view of all the people, just like, you know, first, you know, very a historical event, really first time in their lives, something like that. I can't really talk about Hōkūleʻa's story without mentioning this man as well, Eddie Aikau. Some of you may have heard of his name. There's a famous like surf contest that goes on here in Hawaii, and at Waimea Bay, only if the waves are big enough. They have to be 20 feet local style or 40 feet from the back. So this man was a lifeguard at Waimea Bay. He surfed big waves, and he was a crew member with Hōkūleʻa on their second attempt. So the first voyage was in 1976, and in 1978, Polynesian Voyage Society wanted to go back to Tahiti again, but this time they didn't have Mau, they didn't have that navigator, and this man was on board. He's sitting on his surfboard in this picture, and he's paddling around the canoe before they depart from Magic Island and he strapped his canoe he strapped his surfboard to the canoe because he wanted to surf when they got to Tahiti. Um, Sadly, though, the conditions were actually not ideal. And when they got into the channel between two islands, Hōkūleʻa had actually one hull filled with water and they ended up capsizing. They flipped over. And Eddie tried to paddle for help, but he wasn't seen after he'd left the canoe. It's a much longer and very tragic story, but in keeping with the time that we have, I want to bring that up because it's, he really saw Hōkūleʻa, especially after that first voyage. He wanted to pull Tahiti out of the sea as well and bring back pride to Hawaii's children. That was like really a dream that he had. And he couldn't stand to see the canoe upside down. So that's another thing. That's part of who he was. He saved lives in Waimea Bay, and here he saw, his crew members. There were upside down for at least overnight, 2 nights, and then the next that morning he tried to paddle out for help. They were eventually seen by a plane that was flying farther south of their route. Anyways, this sacrifice, this tragedy, it was a really another kind of significant time in Hōkūleʻa's history because there was a part of the community that thought, it's not worth losing any lives for, so let's just put this canoe in the museum, like that's it. And then you had the voyaging community who really thought like, no, we need to realize Eddie's dream. And imagine if the canoe had gone into a museum, the legacy would have been failure. And really at that time, that was, some of what was expected was that all these Hawaiians are going to fail. So that would have been very detrimental to, this whole beginning of this resurgence of that pride in who we are and the brilliance of our ancestors, really. So I'm very grateful that those who wanted to ensure that the legacy wouldn't be failure, that they continued on, but really what was very what was necessary, what was evident that was necessary was to have Mao again. And so a man, Nainoa Thompson, was a man that's most associated with Hōkūleʻa. He went to find Mao in Mao's island and actually went to Yap, and that's where he found Mao. And he asked him, he said, "Can you please come back to Hawaii?" Mao had heard about Eddie Aikau's death, and Nainoa told him basically, we need you to come back, but not because we need you to find Tahiti for us again, but we need you to help us to find it for ourselves. And with that, Mao came back and he spent a couple of Hawaii winters with Nainoa. And then in 1980, 2 years later, Nainoa became the first Hawaiian man to navigate to Tahiti and back without instruments. After that voyage, in 1985, Hōkūleʻa sailed all the way, kind of retracing migratory routes all the way to Aotearoa, New Zealand, which is the southwest corner of Polynesia. This is a picture of them in 1985 being greeted by a Maori canoe. In 1999, there'd been more voyages in between, but the other corner of the Polynesian Triangle, Rapa Nui, known for these moai, Hōkūleʻa sailed there, the southeast corner of Polynesia, and really all the islands in the major island groups within Polynesia, and then also our backyard. This is a picture of Nihoa, an island that's about a 30-hour sail from Kauai going to the northwest, or northwestern Hawaiian Islands, or we call Kupuna Islands. And then in 2007, Hōkūleʻa went to Mao's island. So people of Hawaii and from all over the world that were, touched by this, the brilliance of this man, Maokeʻailug, and just wanted to mahalo him, to thank him, came to Hawaii to build him a canoe, and a canoe of our kind of style canoe that could be like a big classroom for him in his island. and we sailed to Satawal. So this is a picture of Satawal, where Mao is from. As I mentioned, their islands are very low. Some of the tallest things are like coconut trees or the hulu trees. So if you can imagine their ability to navigate, for them, it's more like hundreds of miles between islands, but they have very good um, understanding of a relationship with the natural worlds to be able to find these tiny low-lying but when actually, and I was on that voyage as well in the 2007, and sailed to his island, and Mo kind of put on this ceremony that we call a pole ceremony, which is PWO, pole, which recognized there were 5 men from Hawaii in this circle, and the other 9, I believe, are from those islands in Micronesia. And really, it's sort of, you can maybe compare it to like a graduation ceremony, where he was recognizing that, after all these years of voyaging, from that very first voyage in 1976, and then all the voyages that had happened since then, for Mao, an important thing was that this knowledge be shared, right? So for what he was seeing in his own islands was the young people weren't as interested in learning the navigation because they were getting introduced to, things like a compass or like a GPS and motorboats. And so it's almost this like he saw what had happened with the loss of this knowledge in Hawaii. He was worried that's what was going to happen in his own islands. And so with this post ceremony, he recognized the men who were his students, and who had successfully navigated, proven their abilities, and so kind of graduated them in this ceremony. Graduation is not the best word, but also more importantly, beyond recognizing their abilities, was giving them the responsibility, the kuleana, that they now have to teach. So Mao was getting older. He actually broke a lot of protocol in his own islands by teaching this knowledge outside of his family. It's something that, very sacred knowledge that got passed down. He learned from his grandfather and father. And there were people who were not happy that he taught this outside of his family, outside of their islands even. But really, so part of this voyage was to go and thank him for doing that, for kind of bucking his system and being willing to have the foresight that he needed to teach, these students in Hawaii who were willing to learn, and that knowledge would survive with them, if not in his own family. Sorry, long explanation for that. But so then in here we have 5 Hawaiian men who are now kind of our leadership when we look to navigators. And now I just want to share a little bit about how the navigation happens. But I just wanted to give kind of that background of how it kind of got to that point, and what we are learning, like the kind of navigation we do now. It's really like a marriage of the knowledge that Papa Mao had shared with his students, and his students, may have different styles or different methods of their navigation. So I mostly learned from Nainoa Thompson, who was the navigator of that 1980 voyage. And then he continued to be a leader within the Polynesian Voyaging Society, and really the system of wayfinding that he developed is what a lot of us that sail Hōkūleʻa, what we learn. Of course, when we think non-instrument navigation, most people think stars, and stars are amazing. Understanding how they move, how they appear to move. And Nainoa figured out a number of ways to use them by spending a lot of time in actually the Bishop Museum Planetarium, which is, I'm fortunate we still get to kind of train in that planetarium, and we have a great relationship. They support our crew members before going on voyages, being able to use that space and have that same kind of ability to manipulate the sky to be able to see like what we would see on our voyages. But I'll come back and talk about the stars, because the stars are, they're awesome. The sun, of course, the sun is, if you can imagine, between like from Hawaii to Tahiti, it's about 2,500 miles. And if you can imagine sailing that without using any kind of, not even your phone's compass. you, we're constantly keeping track of what direction we're heading, how fast we're going. And so the sun is our most important um, directional clue. Really, the sun at sunrise and sunset are the most important times of day. So we get our bearings basically at sunrise and also kind of gives us a hint of, the kind of weather that we might expect for the day ahead or the night that follows. I go through these a little quicker. Of course, the moon, the next brightest celestial body. Understanding the pattern of the moon is very important because as it tracks through the sky, there's the quarter moon will rise midday at midnight. So when you have something nice and bright like the moon rising in the middle of the day, it gives you another directional clue that can be very helpful for a navigator to kind of, reaffirm that, okay, yes, you're going in the right direction. The ocean surface is really sometimes all we have, the sun gets really high or nighttime and it's dark. You always have the ocean surface. I'll kind of come back and talk about that. But in this photo, just showing like a squall. So being really aware of, how strong winds are. Are you going to be able to sail through it? You have to close your sails or you're going to get damaged. Yeah, so you're just really exposed to all the elements. Colors in the sky are important as well. And then you have wildlife. So birds, there's some birds like this one here. This is a frigate bird. We call it Eva. Some birds like this that can hang out at sea and are not going to give you a good idea of how far away land is. Knowing, which birds are which. This one here, we call this Honolulu. It's a white fairy tern. This is a very helpful indicator of land for navigators because we estimate its range is about 120 miles from land. So when we're constantly estimating, basically it's a system of dead reckoning, estimating where we are along our journey. And when we start to see these, again, it's kind of a reaffirmation, like, okay, we expect that we're going to see land soon. And these guys, if we see them again, maybe 120 miles away, we see them before we can see the land. And again, those are also going to be birds that will be like, they'll leave the island, birds like that leave the island in the morning to go out and get food, and then they return in the evening. So that's kind of how they would help us find where land is. And so here, kind of get into the stars a little bit. This is a map of the celestial sphere, really. It's a star map. And this, if you're used to looking at star maps, you might notice that this is a little bit offset. And the reason is, I thought I would at least show you guys kind of give you a picture, a visual of, these are all the stars in the sky. And one way that we learn them is by kind of organizing the sky into what we call star lines. So I'm not actually sure if you guys can see my cursor as I drag it over the star map here, but we have four main divisions of the sky. We call 4 star lines, and you can see kind of the names here. I'll go from the left: Kalupeo Kavelo, the kite of Kavelo, Manaya Kalani, come from heaven. Kalupea Kavelo is the name of and the star line that the square Pegasus is a part of. This triangle here, which is mostly known as the summer triangle, we also call it the navigator's triangle. It's part of Manaya Kalani, which is the star line name and also the name of Maui's fishhook, which is Scorpius. We have also here the star line called Ka'iwi Kuamo'o, which goes from the North Star to the Southern Cross. It includes the Big Dipper. And then on the right is Keka o Makali'i, the Baler of Makali'i. And this is prominent in our sky now after sunset. Actually, it's getting pretty high already. But this is kind of a half circle shape that it's like it's scooping up Orion. And it's got 2 of the brightest stars in the night sky. But anyway, so this is just an idea. We organize the sky into these groups, these patterns. So bright stars and constellations that they're a part of, and then bigger than constellations is these star lines or star families. And then we memorize where these stars all rise, where they rise and set. So in that way, we can use them for direction. In this star map, I guess to give you a sense, so we'd have it would actually go, even though I read it from left to right, the order that we see them in, is we see from the star line that Orion is a part of, and then it's followed by the Southern Cross, the North Star to the Southern Cross star line, and then it's followed by the triangle and the scorpion, and then it's followed by the square. So part of our learning process is, you understand, the way that things appear to move because of our rotation on our axis, right? And because the stars are consistent, every time they rise and set, they give us a directional clue. Other ways that Nainoa figured out to use the stars, I'll kind of get into one example of that. But one way is included is like telling time at night. So the circumpolar stars, we kind of use that like the hands of a clock. And if you see these pink lines that are drawn connecting pairs of stars here, we call those meridian pointers. But one of the most special pair of meridian pointers that I'll talk a little more about is this one in the Southern Cross. So the top star and the bottom star of the Southern Cross, they point directly south. And I have one more kind of just informational picture here showing this is how we kind of keep ourselves oriented. This is our Hawaiian star compass. So it's basically the circle is the horizon around us. The bird is like, imagine that's you in the middle of the circle, surrounded by this 360-degree horizon, or circle of horizon. And then we divide the horizon into these equal parts. There are actually 32 of these equal parts. We call them houses. And so we basically like say the stars live in a house. So whatever house they rise from on the eastern side of our compass, they will set in that same house on the western side of our compass. So as an example here, I'll use the star Hōkūleʻa or Arcturus as an example. It lives in this hale, we call that Aina, which means land, and the quadrant, northeast quadrant is Ko'olau. So it rises in Aina, Ko'olau, and then it'll move through the sky, and then it'll set over here in Aina, the northwest quadrant, which we call Ho'olua. So this is a compass actually that Nainoa developed based on the compass that Mao taught him, which is the Micronesian star compass. But hopefully this kind of gives you an idea. One way we can use the stars are these directional clues. So the more stars you know, the more confident you can be in keeping yourself on course. And here's the Southern Cross. So I think this is just one of my favorite constellations, I will say. I know you folks can't see it over there at your latitude. You're too far north. But here in Hawaii's latitude, the Southern Cross makes this like shallow arc above our southern horizon. And this is a picture here where you can see top star and the bottom star. And that's how you can tell that's the cross there. When it's upright like this, we actually use our hands to measure. So this is one of those, another method or a way that we can use the stars while we're navigating. This also has a bright Alpha and Beta Centauri pointing at the Southern Cross, so you know it's the real one, not the false cross. But basically the top and the bottom star, they are always 6 degrees apart. And then the bottom star to the horizon at the latitude of Oahu, specifically at 21 degrees north, it is also 6 degrees apart. So just by looking at this picture, maybe you folks might be able to tell that we're actually not at the latitude of Oahu here because it's not quite equal. So this is a photo. So I'm not sure how easy it would be for me to like ask you guys questions, but this is a photo of we were sailing. Well, so if you can picture, you're in Hawaii or even in up where you folks are, far north, you're sailing south. And we're sailing to Tahiti. The southern stars will get higher and the northern stars will get lower. Yeah. And so there's a strategy for getting to Tahiti, you're basically trying to find the Tuamotu archipelago first. And then from there, you know the direction to the island Tahiti. When you're coming home from Tahiti back to Hawaii, you're basically trying to get to the windward side of the island. So you want to stay to the east side of the archipelago of Hawaii. And then this clue, the stars in the Southern Cross, is what I know I figured out is the best celestial clue to know you're at the right latitude. And so in this photo here, we're still south of Oahu. So the Southern Cross is getting lower. And we actually want to turn when we think we're at about 20 degrees north, because that'll put us at the northern tip of Hawaii Island. And I'm sorry, I should have thought to show pictures of like the latitudes of our island. But trust me when I say this photo, as we're sailing home to Hawaii from Tahiti, every night we're watching this thing get lower, lower, lower in the sky. And then when we know that it's actually about like 7 degrees high, the bottom star up off from the horizon, then we know we're at the latitude to turn west, and then we should sail into and see like Mauna Kea, which is the biggest mountain on Hawaii Island, Haleakala on Maui. We expect to see these tall islands. And then just to give you an idea, this is actually even further south than Tahiti. This is a picture on our voyage to Aotearoa. So we have the Southern Cross here, and it is actually an Aotearoa, it's circumpolar, so it does that at all. And a lot of those like Australia and a lot of Southern Hemisphere countries will have Southern Cross on their flags, right? Because it's such a prominent constellation. But yeah, so this is, you can see it's on its side. We would never see this image in Hawaii sky, and definitely not where you folks are either. And that's just another view of how high it looks there. And then if anyone has seen Moana, like we actually do like measure. So I'm talking about measuring the stars. We actually do measure it with our hands. So our hands become our like measuring instrument. This is on our trip home to Hawaii from Tahiti. And this is just a closer up view of what we're measuring. So we know the top and bottom star, they're like this awesome ruler for us to see, like, this is what 6 degrees should look like. So it makes it a lot simpler to see, to compare to that, the top star, the distance of the bottom star to the horizon. And actually, this is what we first approached on that voyage. So if you can see, barely maybe in like the haziness, this is kind of the peak of Haleakala that we're approaching from over 100 miles away. And then just to give you kind of an idea, so I was talking about latitude and stuff. Here's the Hawaiian island. The island of Hawaii here is the biggest one with Mauna Kea on it. And then down here, this is Tahiti. So these, the red lines are actually a track of Hōkūleʻa sailing. Oh wait, is that Hōkūleʻa? Well, it's one going down south from Hawaii to Tahiti. And then the yellow line here is the return route from Tahiti coming back up to Hawaii. So you can see here, this is like the doldrums area. And then as we get towards the latitude of Hawaii, you notice we're on the east side of the islands, because our trade winds are northeast winds. So we want to be on the windward side. And then we make this sharp left turn to the west once we make that measurement, and we can feel really confident that we're at the right latitude. And maybe hard to see in the picture, but we're right at like that top latitude of Hawaii Island. So I was trying to explain. So I thought maybe I'll stop there. I'm really afraid to end my slideshow view. I had a short like video clip of something that was recorded in the planetarium, so you could actually see the view of like the Southern Cross getting higher in the sky from our latitude, approaching Tahiti, getting to Tahiti, and then watching it come back down again to the horizon. So I think maybe 2:45, maybe I'll just stop here and I'll see if I lost anyone, or if anyone has like clarifying questions or anything they want to share just based on what I've said so far. Shall I open it up for questions? And then if there's time, if no one has questions, I'll pull up this video.
Yeah, so let's give a round of applause.
Thank you.
This is working. Okay. If anyone on Zoom has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I can see that, and you should be able to message the host. If anyone in the room has questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'm going to pass the microphone so that you can hear you over on Zoom, and everyone in the room can hear you. So, any questions? Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk. So I understand how you get the effectively the latitude where you are when you're sailing from the elevation of the stars. But the problem with navigation is always been figuring out the longitude where you are east and west. Can you give us some insight into how you do that without the aid of an accurate clock or GPS system?
Sure. Yes. Thanks for asking that. Yeah. So actually this, I'll come back to this slide because, basically what we do is before we go on a voyage, we use a nautical chart and we figure out, like we actually, draw out a reference course, and that reference course, it incorporates, we take into account like what the average wind and current conditions are. So we factor in like current set and the direction that we can sail based on average wind conditions, and we factor in our average speed. And so we draw this line on the nautical chart and we figure out, okay, what all of our heading needs to be throughout. We kind of separate between Hawaii and Tahiti the different kind of weather zones. Northeast trades, the doldrums, and then the southeast trades once we get south of the equator. And then that when we actually are on the canoe, we have that as a vision in our mind. So this imaginary line over the water that we want to be sailing on. And that really becomes, the reference course becomes our like 0-degree longitude line. So you're right, we can't tell our longitude by looking at the stars or like measuring the stars like we can for latitude. So we keep track of how far we are east or west of that reference course of our imaginary course that we're trying to sail on the water. And so we're at like sunrise and sunset, we're constantly estimating, okay, we sailed this far in this direction. And let's say, I don't know if you guys can see my pointer, my cursor, but let's say we're this spot X miles east of our reference course. And then maybe because of the wind conditions, the next day we're right on our reference course or maybe slightly to the west. And so without the longitude knowledge, it's we kind of form our own 0-degree longitude that we base our position off of. It's a great question.
Thank you. Any other questions? All right, here you go.
Yeah, so I understand old maps that the navigators used were like sticks placed together that didn't have too much to do with latitude. Give some insight how those maps work.
If I heard your question correctly, are you referring to the stick chart, the stick maps that are kind of found like in the Marshall Islands?
Okay, maybe that's what I'm talking.
Oh yeah, so they usually have like maybe shells are representing islands. So yeah, my understanding of that is and then in places like those are Marshall Islands, which are part of the kind of group of islands we lump in as Micronesia, even though it's all really not Oceania. But the islands are like closer together, and so again, my understanding of it is it's their understanding of the swell patterns around the island. So there's some like curved like sticks, and then there's some straight sticks, and a lot of the kind of navigation actually that Mao did. I mentioned that Nainoa kind of developed his own system because it's not exactly how Mao navigates. but in some of like, it's like a perspective thing. Um, in some ways, they imagine themselves like where they are relative to other islands. So it's almost like they're pulling islands to like from in front of them, they're pulling them to their side and behind them. And these stick chart maps are kind of like indicators of how the swell move between these islands. Simple version of what those are.
If we don't have any questions in the room, I think we have one on Zoom. Someone asked, how many voyages have you been on?
Oh, myself. Let's see. My first voyage was in the year 2000. I can't believe that's 25 years ago now. Actually, I was sailing around this time of the year. It was from Tahiti, sailing back home to Hawaii. And I served as an apprentice navigator as my first voyage. And I also sailed in 2004. After that, the next long voyage up to those northwestern Hawaiian islands, so the archipelago beyond Hawaii, all the way up to Midway and Kure. Some people know of those islands at least. I've also sailed after that. The next voyage was in 2000. So from Hawaii to Majuro, which is in the Marshall Islands, and onto the islands of Micronesia and Maui Islands, Takawal. And then from that one we continued on to Okinawa and Japan. And I stayed with the canoe that whole 5 months. But usually people switch out. And then I also sailed during the worldwide voyage. I did get to do a few legs in our island. So Hawaii to Tahiti, Samoa to Tonga to Aotearoa, and then from Tahiti back to Hawaii. So kind of a nice full circle after my first voyage. Then I also got to spend on that worldwide voyage. We actually went all the way around, and I got to spend time on the East Coast from where did I jumped on Martha's Vineyard, and then sailed up to New Hampshire. I didn't quite get all the way to, but yeah. So I've been sailing for a long time, and just all of these voyages, you're always learning. There's always more to learn. But it's been really awesome to have teachers that, and I know especially who has taught his kind of way of wayfinding. When you're different parts of the world, it's when you're coastal sailing, it's not quite the same as the deep sea sailing. So you're not really relying on the stars and things. But yeah, those deep sea ones are pretty special, and reminders of like how amazing those who explored before us were.
Well, thank you. Do we have any last questions in the room? Is that a hesitant question back there? Okay.
Thanks very much for the talk. Is there a seasonal component to any of these? You talk about Southern Cross a little. Are there other constellations to get used that can't be used all the time because they're up when the sun is, or any other seasonal considerations required to get more of a different year?
Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to hear exactly the full question. I caught you're wondering if there are more constellations besides the Southern Cross.
Can you hear me better from over here?
I do hear that a little better.
Okay, his question was, are there other constellations besides the Southern Cross that have seasonal components to when you, is that the gist?
Yes. So yeah, the way that, like, for the Southern Cross, for us to see that in Hawaii, when we're going to see it upright at night, right, or at least in the darkness, that's like mostly January to June. So we usually will time our voyages home in that time period so that we will have that cross to measure. But yeah, so as a navigator, you would need to understand the sky well enough, so understanding the patterns to know what is going to be visible at the time that you're going to voyage. So the Southern Cross is really the main one that like we use for getting home to Hawaii. So there's that kind of timing. Most other of voyages, like or not necessarily relying on a single constellation, but just knowing all the stars and constellations that you'll have available to you throughout the time that you're on a voyage. So like a consideration, another kind of consideration would be like when we're going through the doldrum, we might want to time that period because it's like heavy cloud. It could be heavy cloud cover. You might want to time that when you're going to have a bigger moon. So you have like, if you don't have stars, you'll at least maybe be able to see the moon. If that makes sense. So like, understanding that too, the pattern of the moon and when it rises and sets, and roughly an hour later or later every night. Yeah, so getting back to your question, Southern Cross is a special one in that one is our best latitude for Hawaii, but there isn't another one, at least I'm not thinking off the top of my head, that's like a specific, we want this to be visible during our voyage. It's just that we use whatever would be available at the time that we're sailing. I hope that makes sense.
Did you have another question? Okay.
So one final question that I keep wondering about, do you keep a log or a record when you're the navigator on the ship sailing? Something that you can learn to sort of improve your technique or study from later, or do you keep most of this in your head? Imagine
Yeah.
the old sailor used to paper, the equivalent stuff.
Okay. Sorry again, I'm trying to make sure I understand the question, but you're asking about whether we keep a log while we're sailing or keep it in our head. And was there something else in addition to that part of the question? Yeah, so kind of interesting. Like for me as well, I felt like I was a young person, realizing I'm getting older constantly. I like to keep a journal and keep a log just in general while I'm on a voyage. So, just some of the cool things that we might see, like, for example, my first voyage is the first time I ever saw a moonbow, a white rainbow at night, moonlight. Or, certain places you see dolphins and you might expect to see them in that same part of the ocean. But when it comes to the navigation, I'll just share something that Nainoa, in his learning with Mao, Mao recognized that the way that Nainoa learned in our, kind of school systems we have now, he's like, you write down what I tell you, because I'm only going to say it once. I'm not going to repeat it. So when you learn, because Nainoa was trying to just like learn by listening and absorbing. And that's how Mao learned when he was young. But Mao recognized, okay, you need to write stuff down. But when it came to the actual like going on the voyage, kind of the thing that sticks in my mind is Mao would say, well, if you write it down, what happens if the paper flies away? So for him, like you want to internalize while you're voyaging. So we actually, when we study our reference course, we want to be able to tell it to somebody, like we're giving directions, like how to get to our house. And then while you're on the voyage, you're not looking at the nautical chart to see on the reference course where you are. That is something you really do try to internalize. But each person is different. For myself, like I find myself, if I have that, if that's my responsibility, I like to write things down because I feel like I haven't built up my brain capacity to just like memorize so much. That is part of the challenge, I think, of that navigation is it's a lot of is internalizing and memorizing and making all these decisions throughout the day to get to a point, at sunrise and sunset of being confident in where you think you are. And then having those clues. So the target, and adding on to your question, it's just making me think that you could also think of it like you're not just aiming for one tiny rock in the middle of nothing. right? Like coming home to Hawaii, we have this nice archipelago. So we kind of have this bigger, like a target screen, I know I called it. And then going to Tahiti, the Tuamotu archipelago. So it's like you're not just worried about finding the single island of Tahiti, but you try to expand your landfall. And then the same, well, then there's those challenging islands like Rapa Nui or Easter Island, which is it was the last of the Polynesian Triangle we went to because of that difficulty. It's upwind and it's all by itself. It's not part of an archipelago. And if you miss it, you have to like double your voyage time to you get to South America after that. But yeah, so it's a lot of brain power.
I think we have one more question. So someone asked, how long does it take to sail from Hawaii to Tahiti?
Yeah, so about 2,500 miles. And the first voyage, they took 31 days. And on our most recent voyages, we've taken about 18 to 19 days. So it depends on the conditions, but roughly like 3 to 4 weeks.
And then I think our final question, in the interest of time, was, are there any significant myths or legends surrounding the main constellations you mentioned, probably that are unique from the ones we may have learned?
Yeah. For our Hawaii stories, we don't know as many of them as we would like. Like we have stories about, for example, the star cluster Pleiades, we call that Makali'i. We have associations with, for example, when Makali'i is rising above the eastern horizon at sunset, then the first new moon after that occurs. That marks the beginning of what we call Makahiki. So it's a new year. It's the beginning of our calendar was a lunar calendar. But there's the time or the season of it's like the wet season, the season that's dedicated to like agriculture and fertility and peace. So we have those kinds of associations, but we don't have as many of the stories like why the stars or constellations got their name. Like we do, like we know a lot of the Greek stories, right? So yeah, I always tell my students like that'd be a great project for you guys to try to dig and find more stories of our constellation.
Well, in the interest of time, I think we will give one final round of applause.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks so much for taking time out of your day to come talk to us. For everyone in the room, as usual, we are open from 8 p.m. to midnight over at Bird Observatory. Last I checked, cloud cover was pretty bad. Maybe that 10% came in our favor, but either way, we still have our beautiful historical telescope and all the other beautiful historical artifacts we have over there. If this is a bit too late for you, we will be open at 6 p.m. to about 10 p.m. on Sunday night as part of the orchestra collaboration. So feel free to stop by then. I don't know whether it will be better, but we can all hope. Otherwise, if weather is good, we will have a solar telescope over at Bailey Hall at 2 p.m. on Sunday, as again part of the orchestra collaboration. So if the sun peeks out from behind the clouds, you'll get a chance to look at it. And thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.